What is economics? What do economists do? Often economics students can struggle to answer these questions. I've had plenty of experience and seen the struggle firsthand, and I'm telling you, economics is more than the dismal science. The definition isn't a compelling answer. The standard sort of definition of economics doesn't really satisfy the questions for most people. That economics is the study of resources with scarcity and unlimited wants. Most graduates in economics. There's a basic set of tools that most graduates are likely to come equipped with. That can extend into basics in research, stats, and interpreting data, although not all research is made equal. You get used to hearing correlation does not imply causation. There are things like utility and incentives, and benefit cost analysis, which is a complicated way to weigh up pros and cons, similar to what people do all the time without the spreadsheet and the stats. I should say accounting and economics can be easily confused. Accounting considers explicit costs, whereas economics considers inexplicit costs as well, which helps to incorporate opportunity cost, making economics more interesting in comparison, at least to me. Many graduates get asked all sorts of questions, but asking an economist that works on managing water reserves may not be all that helpful at doing your taxes. Career paths can vary through academia, government, private firms, including consulting, think tanks, and not-for-profits. What one economist does might not relate almost at all to what another economist does. You could totally help me do my taxes, right? Well, it's not really what I do. Vagueness of economics. There are very real problems, such as you can't stick an economy into a lab, and that's for very practical and ethical reasons. Just imagine trying to stick the world economy into a box. You can't, and, well, you shouldn't. There are many different pieces to an economy, including the intermingling of the choices of 8 billion people. Now, the economy of a country is on a small scale, but even then, countries interact with one another. Unless you're North Korea. But even North Korea isn't completely isolated. Another is the problem with data. This is in part because of how many pieces to the puzzle there really is, and at the end of the day, data isn't always accurate and there's not always enough of it. The beginning of the depths of economics. Economics is often split into 2 parts, macro and micro. At this point, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. But when it comes to research, while there are a lot of different categories, using the JEL codes by the American Economic Association, although there is usually plenty of overlap, we have positive and normative questions in economics. So positive is what is, and normative is how things should be, which is usually more value-based. Subdisciplines could include development and growth, trade, financial, public policy, theoretical, environmental, behavioral, and health. Essentially, you name it, and economics likely has something to say about it. This means that there is a wide scope as to what someone pursuing economics may gravitate towards. And, of course, there can be overlap with other fields. I think behavioral is pretty notorious for overlapping with psychology. Economic systems and schools of thought. Okay, systems and schools of thought is kind of this huge web and has developed over time. And I still find it even a lot to process. So let's not get into too much detail right now. The most common mentioned would be capitalism and socialism. There are schools of thought as well. I'll just mention a few. If we go back quite a lot, we have mercantism that fed into classical, Marxian as well as many others. Last century, we get Keynesian and then neoclassical. Most universities teach mainstream economics, incorporating pieces of economics into one school, definitely including a lot of Keynesian and neoclassical criticism. So this is some of the most common things I've heard. Economics receives plenty of criticism, and this includes arguments about GDP and GDP per capita. But let's be clear, Other measurements and indicators do exist. Plenty of people tend to fixate on GDP in particular, but it has its uses in the right context. Within economics, there really is plenty of other measurements and indicators that are used. Another big criticism is models. I think there is plenty of criticism from within economics as well, not to mention the disgruntled students that have to learn them. They aren't perfect, and well, nobody really thinks that they are. Some aren't there for exact interpretations of the world, but to describe a particular concept. And let's not get into economic predictions. There is, of course, other criticisms directed at the balancing act of efficiency and effectiveness. It is easy to criticize on the outside looking in. I bring this up in rebellion because I had to read an article by a political scientist for a course that essentially accused an entire subject of being tone deaf. It is not an easy task to balance the two, but that's not to say nobody in economics cares. I know I was certainly taught to consider both efficiency and effectiveness, but at the end of the day, the world isn't perfect. Groupthink. Needless to say, at this point, there's a lot going on in the field of economics, and it would include those who advocate for more and less intervention. By this, I'm talking about government intervention, especially if you read a variety of books. By this, I mean non-academic books by different economists. You definitely start to see a pattern forming of those for and those against intervention. But keep in mind there is a scale. For example, in the book Nudge, the author suggests libertarian paternalism, in which I feel like they are taking a relatively middle ground. Others say things like it's a question of how much regulation, or talk about restraints. This is to point out there's a range of views among economists. A pet peeve of mine that I see appear in a lot of news articles or said by politicians is economists think or say. This only further exacerbates the problem with how economics is viewed. Now, there are times when it's fair to do a mass grouping, certainly, but the phrase often ignores very real economic debates on issues, many that are far from being settled. Seems to be this catch-all phrase to push a particular point without any mention of any names of actual economists. What I like about economics, now a good part right at the end, my absolutely biased opinion. There's a lot to like about economics, and I do think economics is great. Economics does bring something different to the table. It's a subject that looks at life and life decisions. And it looks to answer, what do we make of it all? There is plenty of economists that spend their careers trying to answer very real questions about how the world is and how the world should be. Some will consider very practical questions relevant to individuals like us, that hopefully can help us improve our lives. We consider economies and economic policies. They have very real consequences, and when done wrong, it can be devastating. But when done well, you can see millions of people move out of poverty. I studied economics because of that. I was led in with an interest in economic development, a fascination with growth, and that progressed into an interest in international trade, among many other things. Since economics can be almost anything, we've got a lot to talk about. So I hope you'll stick around, and I'll see you next time.